On a quiet street, Lily spotted him. Could one choice change her life? An old man wrestling with a broken wheelchair, his face was lined with years, sweat beading on his forehead, the wheel wouldn't budge and he looked so tired, so alone. No one stopped, no one even slowed down, but Lily did. She was late for a meeting that could save her cafe, but she couldn't walk away. What she didn't know was that this small act of kindness would return to her in a way she never imagined. Stay with me, welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning sun rose gently over the small town of Havenbrook, painting the streets in soft amber light. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and where the scent of fresh coffee drifting down Main Street was as much a part of the morning as the rustle of newspapers and the quiet greetings of neighbors. Lily Parker, just 25, stood behind the worn wooden counter of her cafe, the Willow Cup, watching the sunlit dust motes dance in the window. She had opened this place with nothing but a little inheritance, some second-hand furniture, and a stubborn belief that good coffee and warm company could change a day. The Willow Cup was her sanctuary, small tables crowded with mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu that she updated every morning, and an old record player that spun gentle jazz when the world outside felt too loud. She had built it herself, one cup at a time, one careful dollar at a time, but today, the warmth of the sun did little to ease the tight knot in her chest. The notice had come last week. A letter from the fire marshal's office, blunt and heavy, stating her sprinkler system was outdated, no longer up to code. She had known it needed work, but she hadn't expected this. The letter had given her a deadline, 10 days, to bring the system up to standard, 10 days to come up with money she didn't have, 10 days until everything she had poured her heart into might be shut down. Lily leaned her elbows on the counter, tracing the chipped paint with her fingertip. She'd tried not to panic. She'd called in every favor she could think of, scoured second-hand shops for parts, even considered taking out another loan she knew she couldn't pay back, but none of it had been enough. The night before, she decided to try one last thing. She would go to the fire marshal's office and plead her case. Maybe, just maybe, they'd grant her a little more time. She had rehearsed her words all night, calm, respectful, hopeful. That morning, she locked up the cafe early, her mind racing. The streets were quiet at this hour, most folks still stirring in their kitchens, and the click of her boots on the cracked sidewalk was the only sound that followed her. She clutched the file folder tight against her chest, the corners of the official letters already bent from anxious hands. The fire marshal's office was only a 15-minute walk from the cafe, but every step felt like it carried the weight of her entire dream. As she turned onto Maple Avenue, she saw him, an elderly man, sitting alone on the edge of the sidewalk in a battered electric wheelchair. His hair was white as snow, his shoulders slightly stooped, and his gaze fixed somewhere just beyond the horizon. The wheelchair was tilted awkwardly, one wheel caught in a crack in the pavement. She saw the strain in his arms as he tried to free it, the quiet frustration of a man used to doing things himself. Lily hesitated for only a moment. She knew she was already late, she knew that every second counted, but she also knew that walking past him wasn't something she could live with. She set her file folder down on the nearest bench and crouched by his side. "Hi," she said softly, the morning air turning her breath to mist. "Looks like you're stuck. Can I help?" The old man's eyes lifted slowly. They were a pale, steady blue that spoke of years and roads she couldn't imagine. "It's this wheel," he said quietly. His voice was gentle, measured, like someone who chose every word carefully. "It's caught. Can't quite get it free." Lily nodded, glancing at the wheel. The crack in the sidewalk was just deep enough to trap it, and the motor on the chair was whirring faintly, trying and failing to pull free. "Let me try," she said, slipping her fingers under the rubber rim and giving it a firm tug. It didn't budge at first, but she leaned in harder, feeling the strain in her shoulders. The man watched her, his hands resting on his knees, his breath calm despite the cold. Finally, with a jolt and a soft pop, the wheel came free. The chair lurched forward slightly, and Lily steadied it with both hands. "There," she said, breathing hard, but smiling. "You're good to go." The man nodded once, his eyes bright with something like relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but warm. "Most folks would have just kept walking." Lily shrugged, brushing the dirt from her hands. "I couldn't leave you stuck like that." "Are you headed somewhere?" He looked down the street, then back at her. "Just home," he said. "I was visiting an old friend at the Veterans Hall." "It's been a long morning." She offered him a small, sympathetic smile. There was something about the way he said it, quiet but proud, that made her chest ache a little. "I'm Lily," she said softly. He paused, then nodded. "John," he said simply. "John Beckett." She gave a small, respectful nod, her heart pounding with a sudden tenderness she hadn't expected. He shifted the joystick on his chair, the motor whirring softly again. "You're a kind soul, Lily," he said, his voice trailing off. "Not many like you left these days." She watched as he started to roll slowly down the sidewalk, the chair moving carefully over the uneven pavement. She didn't know why, but something about the moment felt important, like she'd stumbled onto something bigger than she could see. She stood there for a breath, then realized the time. She snatched up her folder and broke into a brisk walk, her pulse hammering in her ears. By the time she reached the fire marshal's office, Her cheeks were flushed, her hair damp with sweat. She pushed the door open and stepped into the cold fluorescent light of the waiting room. The receptionist looked up, her expression cool and impatient. "Can I help you?" Lily swallowed, forcing her voice to steady. "I'm here about the extension request," she said, holding up the folder like a shield. "For the Willow Cup." The woman nodded, flicking through a stack of papers on her desk. "You were supposed to be here 15 minutes ago." "I know," Lily said quickly. "I'm sorry, I stopped to help someone on the way. It made me a little late." But the receptionist held up a hand, already shaking her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The marshal can't see you now. He's gone for the day." Lily's stomach dropped. "Please," she said, her voice breaking a little, "I just need 5 minutes. I need more time. I can get the money together if you just give me a little more time." The woman's gaze softened for half a heartbeat, then hardened again. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "but the deadline stands." Lily stood there, her hands trembling around the folder. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She thanked the woman in a whisper and turned to leave, her boots heavy against the tile floor. Outside, the sky had turned overcast, the light gone flat and cold. She stood on the steps of the building, hugging the folder to her chest, and tried to breathe past the rising panic. The Willow Cup was her home, her purpose. She had built it from nothing, but now it felt like the world was taking it away, one brick at a time. She thought of the old man in the wheelchair, his calm blue eyes, and the quiet dignity in his voice. She wondered if he'd had days like this, days when the weight of everything seemed impossible to carry. She took a shaky breath, then started the slow walk back to her cafe. Each step felt heavier than the last. The deadline was still there, looming like a storm she couldn't outrun, and for the first time, Lily felt truly alone with it. Lily pushed open the door of the Willow Cup, the familiar creak of the hinges echoing in the stillness. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of roasted beans and cinnamon, but it did little to ease the heaviness in her chest. She set her file folder down behind the counter and forced herself to take a deep breath. The morning rush had already come and gone. The rush felt like too generous a word these days. A few regulars sat hunched over their cups, quiet voices murmuring beneath the low hum of the old record player. They didn't know what was happening, and Lily didn't plan on telling them. She wiped the counter with slow, careful strokes, her mind running through numbers she didn't want to face. Calls to contractors had gone nowhere. Even the cheapest quotes were far beyond what she had in the till. Every time she thought about the deadline, her throat tightened. She could almost feel the weight of that letter pressing against her rib cage. She spent the afternoon on the phone, voice low and polite, trying not to let the desperation slip through. She called old friends, distant cousins, even the bank, though she already knew what they'd say. Each conversation ended the same: "I'm sorry. I wish I could help," or worse, just silence and an awkward goodbye. By the time she hung up the last call, the sun was already dipping below the rooftops. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the espresso machine and let out a long, shaky sigh. The next day didn't bring any miracles. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a customer who lingered too long at the counter, eyeing the sprinklers above with a frown. "Heard you're going to shut you down," he said bluntly. "That true?" Lily forced a small smile, her voice calm even as her heart stuttered. "We're working on it," she said. "It'll be fine." He just shrugged and turned away, but his words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Word spread quickly in a town like Havenbrook. By the end of the week, fewer faces were showing up for morning coffee. The ones who did kept their voices low, their eyes darting around the ceiling like they expected to see smoke at any moment. Lily felt it with every empty table, every quiet hour. The Willow Cup was her dream, but it was slipping through her fingers like water. She didn't let herself cry. Instead, she did what she always did. She opened the door every morning, turned on the lights, and made coffee like nothing was wrong. She swept the floors, scrubbed the counters, and lined up the mismatched cups like little soldiers, ready for whoever might wander in. She never told anyone about the letter, not her parents back in Ohio who already worried too much, not her best friend from college who lived states away. It felt like admitting defeat if she said the words out loud, so she carried it alone, shoulders straight, eyes bright with determination she barely felt. 3 days later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, she was wiping down the pastry case when the bell above the door jingled softly. She looked up, expecting one of the regulars, but froze when she saw him. It was the old man from the sidewalk, John Beckett. He rolled in slowly, the soft whir of his electric wheelchair filling the hush of the cafe. Lily's breath caught for a moment. She almost didn't know what to say. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I was hoping you had a cup of coffee for an old man." She blinked, then found her smile. "Of course," she said, moving quickly behind the counter. "How do you take it?" "Black," he said. "Always black." She poured the coffee carefully, her hand steady. Even as her mind buzzed with questions, she couldn't help but notice how much better the chair looked. No more tilting, no more struggling with the wheels. She wondered if he'd managed to fix it himself or if someone had helped him. She set the cup down in front of him, her voice soft. "There you go." He took a sip, his eyes closing for a moment as the warmth spread through him. "Perfect," he said. "You make a good cup Of coffee. Miss Lily, hearing her name and his gentle voice made her throat tighten. Thank you, she said almost shyly. He glanced around the little shop, his gaze lingering on the faded curtains and the mismatched chairs. You've built a lovely place here, he said. It feels honest. Lily laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That's what I was going for, she said. Honest, he nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against the ceramic mug. It's a rare thing these days, he said quietly, a place where people still care. For a moment, they just sat in the gentle hum of the cafe, her behind the counter, him by the window, the soft strains of the jazz record weaving around them like a comforting blanket. She wanted to ask why he'd come, if he remembered her from that morning on Maple Avenue, or if this was just a coincidence, but something in his calm gaze told her not to rush it. When he finished his coffee, he thanked her again, his words simple but sincere, then he turned his chair toward the door, the motor humming softly as he maneuvered out into the late afternoon light. Lily watched him go, her heart beating a little faster than it should. She didn't know what had meant this quiet visit, this man who seemed to see straight through to the heart of her, but for the first time in days, she felt a tiny flicker of something she hadn't dared let herself feel. Hope. Could this quiet encounter save her cafe? The next morning, the sun rose pale and cold over Havenbrook. Lily unlocked the cafe at dawn, the key turning with a reluctant click in the old lock. She stood for a moment in the doorway, breathing in the scent of roasted beans and worn wood, and let it remind her why she fought so hard. She moved through the motions, grinding the beans, wiping down the tables, humming softly to herself like she always did, but in the quiet moments when the shop was empty and the world felt too big, she felt the weight pressing down on her chest. The deadline hadn't moved, the money hadn't magically appeared, and every day, the silence of the empty chairs felt a little louder. Still, she opened the doors each morning, she served the regulars who still came, offered them warm smiles in steaming cups, and pretended she wasn't counting every dollar in the till. She didn't know what else to do but keep going. It was on one of those mornings when the world felt especially heavy that she saw him again. John Beckett. He rolled in slowly, his chair moving smooth and easy over the worn threshold. He didn't say much at first, just offered her that same calm smile that seemed to reach right inside her and steady her pulse. In morning, Miss Lily, he said softly. Morning, she replied, pouring his coffee with practiced ease. He sipped it slowly, his eyes thoughtful as they watched her move behind the counter. You look tired, he said gently. She paused, startled by the quiet concern in his voice. I'm okay, she said quickly, just a lot on my mind. He didn't press her, just nodded once and took another sip. They talked about nothing, about the weather, the music playing softly in the background, the way the leaves outside had started to turn gold at the edges. She didn't tell him about the letter or the deadline or the way her dreams felt like they were slipping away grain by grain, but somehow sitting across from him, she felt a little less alone. When he left that morning, he didn't say much more than a quiet thank you, but as he rolled out into the sunlight, Lily felt something settle in her chest. She didn't know why he kept coming back, she didn't know what he saw in her small cafe that was worth the trouble, but she was grateful for it in a way she couldn't quite put into words. As she watched him disappear down the street, she didn't realize yet that this quiet, steady man was about to change everything, and for the first time in a long time, she found herself whispering a quiet prayer to the morning light. Let me find a way. Let me hold on. The sun had just begun to rise when Lily unlocked the front door of the Willow Cup. She stepped into the cool morning air, expecting the same quiet she'd grown used to, but what she saw made her stop short, her breath catching in her chest. Parked in front of the cafe were three small trucks, white, unmarked, but clearly ready for work. She blinked in surprise, her mind racing to catch up with what her eyes were telling her. Before she could step closer, the familiar sound of a soft electric hum reached her ears. John Beckett appeared at the edge of the sidewalk, rolling forward in his wheelchair with a calm, steady expression. Good morning, Miss Lily, he said, his voice warm as always. I hope we're not too early. She stood frozen for a moment, words caught somewhere between her heart and her lips. What is this? She managed to whisper. John gestured behind him where half a dozen men were stepping out of the trucks. They were older like him, faces lined with time and service, movements precise and efficient. Each one wore a simple work shirt, some with sleeves rolled to reveal faded tattoos, all of them with the quiet confidence of men who had seen too much and survived. These are my friends, John said. They're veterans like me, engineers, mechanics, builders, men who know how to fix what needs fixing. Lily stared at them, her throat tight. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. Why are you here? One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair, stepped forward. He carried a heavy toolbox in one hand and a warm smile on his face. We're here for you, miss, he said simply. John told us about your cafe and about you. She felt the first tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. I don't know what to say, she whispered. John's eyes softened. Say yes, he said gently. Let us help. For a moment, Lily hesitated. Her mind was full of worries about permits, about rules, about whether she'd get in trouble for accepting help she hadn't paid for, but as she looked into their calm, steady faces, she realized there was no room for doubt. She nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, she said softly. Please Thank you. The men got to work immediately. They moved like a well-oiled machine, pulling equipment from the truck's pipes, wrenches, heavy-duty drills, and welding tools. One of them handed Lily a bright yellow hard hat with a wink, and she couldn't help but laugh. Wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, she watched as they spread out across the cafe, assessing every inch of the old sprinkler system. They worked quickly, efficiently, voices low and calm as they shared tools and adjusted fittings. John stayed by the door, his chair parked just inside the threshold. He watched the others with a small, contented smile, as if he could already see the finished work in his mind. Lily joined them, her sleeves pushed up, hands trembling a little at first. One of the men showed her how to hold a wrench steady, how to listen for the click that meant the fitting was tight enough. She learned quickly, her breath coming easier as she focused on each small task. Every time she looked up, she caught John's eyes on her, soft and proud. At one point, she paused to catch her breath. Leaning against the counter and wiping sweat from her forehead, she looked around at the men, their sleeves streaked with dust and grease, the quiet hum of their work filling the room like a heartbeat. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. You don't even know me. John's voice was quiet but sure. Because you stopped when you didn't have to, he said. Because you saw a stranger stuck in the street and you chose to help. That's the kind of thing that matters. She blinked hard, fighting back fresh tears. It was nothing, she whispered. He shook his head. It was everything. He said, you reminded me that there's still kindness in this world, and that's worth paying forward. For the rest of the morning, Lily worked alongside them, hauling tools, steadying pipes, handing over wrenches with a wordless, grateful smile. She didn't think about the deadline or the fear that had haunted her for weeks. She just let herself believe for the first time in a long time that things might be okay. By noon, the new pipes had been measured and cut, the old rusty valves carefully removed and set aside. The men worked with the quiet precision of people who took pride in every bolt, every joint. At one point, Lily found herself next to a man named Ray, a retired Air Force mechanic with a gentle laugh and grease-stained hands. He was showing her how to wrap a thread of tape around a pipe fitting, his voice low and patient. You're a quick study, he said with a smile. Ever think of becoming a plumber? She laughed, surprised by how light her heart felt. I'll stick to coffee, she said, but thank you. He just grinned. We're the ones who should be thanking you, he said. As the day wore on, Lily began to see the old failing system transformed. New pipes gleamed under the ceiling, fresh valves clicked into place with a satisfying finality. The air smelled faintly of solder and sweat, but she didn't mind. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. But even as the work neared completion, a flicker of doubt crept back into her chest. She pulled John aside quietly, her voice low. Are you sure this is allowed? She asked. I don't want you to get in trouble for helping me like this. He rested his hand on the armrest of his chair, his gaze steady and reassuring. I spoke with the fire marshal myself, he said calmly. I explained who we are, what we're doing. He knows these men, respects them, and he understands this isn't charity. She swallowed hard, her shoulders slumping with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, John said with a small smile. Let's get it finished first. They worked late into the afternoon, the last rays of the setting sun turning the cafe windows into sheets of soft gold. Lily's arms ached, her hair fell loose around her face, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so alive. The men moved with practiced ease, laughter, and quiet conversation weaving around the steady clink of tools. At one point, someone started humming an old tune low and sweet, and Lily found herself humming along without even realizing it. When the final valve was tightened and the last pipe checked for leaks, John rolled forward, his eyes bright. You did good work today, Miss Lily, he said. She wiped her hands on her jeans, breathless and smiling. I just followed your lead, she said softly. He shook his head. You did more than that, he said. You opened the door. You let us help. That's the hardest part. She looked around at the shining pipes, the men who were now packing up their tools, and felt a rush of quiet pride. I don't know how to repay you, she said, her voice thick. John's smile was gentle, his gaze kind. You already have, he said simply. As the trucks rumbled to life outside, Lily stood in the doorway, watching them go. The last light of day bathed the street in soft, forgiving gold. She felt the exhaustion in her bones, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from work done with love and purpose. Inside the Willow Cup, the new sprinkler system gleamed overhead, a silent promise that her dream wasn't over yet. And as she locked the door that night, she realized something simple and true. Sometimes help comes in unexpected ways, sometimes it arrives in the steady hands of strangers who become family, in the quiet strength of those who choose to stand by you, and sometimes it starts with nothing more than stopping to help an old man on the side of the road. Could this kindness lead to a miracle? The next morning, Lily woke to the soft glow of sunrise spilling through her window. She lay there for a moment, the quiet of dawn wrapping around her like a blanket. The exhaustion in her body was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like something she could carry. When she finally rose and walked to the Willow Cup, she found herself pausing at the door. The early light shimmered on the glass, and she could see the new pipes overhead, gleaming silver and strong. A fresh start, she thought. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Inhaling the scent of roasted coffee and polished wood, she ran her fingertips along the new sprinklers, feeling the weight of gratitude settle in her chest. The town inspector arrived later that morning, his clipboard in hand and a polite smile on his face. He walked slowly through the cafe, checking every valve, every line. Lily's heart pounded in her chest with each measured step. When he finally looked up, his smile widened. "You did good work here," he said. "The system is up to code. You're clear to keep operating." Lily felt a laugh slip out of her, bright and a little shaky. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." As he left, she stood alone in the center of the room, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. The fear that had been clinging to her like a shadow finally began to ease. Word of the repairs spread quickly in Havenbrook. Customers who had stayed away trickled back in, curious and smiling. Some offered quiet congratulations, others simply ordered their coffee with a warmth in their eyes that hadn't been there before. The Willow Cup was alive again, its hum and laughter weaving through the soft clink of cups and the scent of cinnamon rolls, and Lily felt herself alive in it, too, more than she had in weeks. One afternoon, she looked up from the counter to see John Beckett sitting by the window. His chair was turned slightly so he could watch the street outside, his expression calm and content. She poured him a cup of black coffee and carried it over, setting it in front of him with a small, grateful smile. "It's on the house today," she said softly. He looked up at her, his pale blue eyes warm. "I'd argue you've more than paid me back," he said, his voice quiet and kind. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding her hands on the table. "How did you know?" she asked softly. "How did you know that I needed help?" John was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting out the window to where the autumn leaves were starting to gather in gentle drifts. "I didn't," he said at last. "I only knew you stopped to help when you didn't have to. That told me everything." She swallowed hard, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought I was going to lose everything." He nodded slowly. "Fear is a heavy thing," he said, "but you carried it well, Lily. You didn't let it stop you." She hesitated, then reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she said again, her voice breaking just a little. He gave her a small smile. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "there were men I served with who taught me that to stand firm even when you're scared. To help without asking what you get back." His eyes grew distant, the weight of memory softening his features. "Some of them didn't make it home," he said quietly, "and I think about them a lot, about how they'd want me to keep that spirit alive." Lily listened, her chest tight with quiet reverence. She could hear the unspoken stories in his voice, the echoes of men who had given everything so others could live. "I think," John said softly, "that helping each other is the greatest duty we have. That's what those men believed, and that's what I believe, too." Lily nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "I believe it too," she said. They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle sounds of the cafe moving around them, the laughter of customers, the soft hiss of the milk steamer, the warm hum of life that had returned to this place. Lily thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the doubt, the quiet act of kindness that had set all of this in motion. She realized then that the real miracle hadn't been the repairs or the money or even the survival of her dream. It had been the simple quiet choice to help. The choice had become something bigger, something that reached beyond her little cafe and into the hearts of everyone who walked through its doors. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lily stood and moved back behind the counter. She tied her apron with steady hands, her shoulders straight and her head high. She knew now what the Willow Cup was meant to be, a place for second chances, for quiet kindness, for the small unseen moments that made the world a little brighter. The next morning, the cafe was busier than it had been in months. The line stretched out the door, laughter and conversation filling the air like music. Lily moved behind the counter, her hands sure and her smile easy. She poured coffee and wiped down tables, her eyes bright with quiet joy. Every cup she handed over felt like a promise, kept a promise that kindness would always find its way home. In the far corner, John Beckett sat with his old friends, the men who had come in trucks and tool belts, who had given their time and skill to save her dream. They sipped their coffee and talked in low voices, the soft rumble of their laughter grounding her in the moment. Every now and then, John looked up and caught her eye, and every time she saw the same gentle smile that had steadied her heart when she'd needed it most. As the day wore on, the sun turned the windows to warm gold, and Lily paused to take it all in. She saw the small things, the way a customer's shoulders relaxed when they took their first sip, the soft murmur of an old couple sharing a pastry, the quiet hush of a young man reading a worn book in the corner. She realized that the Willow Cup was more than a business, it was a home, a place for anyone who needed a little warmth in a world that could be cold and unforgiving. And she promised herself in that soft light of the afternoon that she would always remember the lesson John Beckett had given her, that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can ripple out in ways we can't imagine, that even when we're scared, even when we feel alone, there is strength in choosing to stop, to see, and to help. As the last customer left that night and Lily locked the door behind them, she looked out at the empty street, the quiet of the evening settling over the town. She thought of the day she'd stopped for a stranger in a broken wheelchair. She thought of the way that moment had turned into 1,000 other kindnesses, each one a quiet echo of that first choice, and she knew with a certainty that warmed her to her bones that the Willow Cup would always have room for one more seat, for anyone who needed it, for anyone who believed like she did that kindness, real simple, unshakable, could change everything. That night, she switched off the lights one by one in the soft click of each bulb, like a heartbeat in the dark. In the quiet glow of the final lamp, she turned and saw John Beckett watching her from his corner table, his hands wrapped around his cup. He didn't say a word, he just nodded once, a silent promise that some things never fade, and Lily smiled back, her heart full and steady, ready for whatever might come next. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.